Good afternoon. I'm Bruce Kingma. For those of you that have been wondering what I've been doing for the last 3 years, I'm now the Associate Provost at Syracuse University for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Some of you may be familiar with my work in economics of libraries. I have a PhD in economics and have worked in this domain for probably about 15 or 20 years. Joined Syracuse University about a decade ago, and 3 years ago actually joined the Chancellor's team at Syracuse University by being named Associate Provost for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. The best job at any university, I have to say that. I am called on almost as a consultant to the Chancellor on pretty much everything we do at the university now. All of her initiatives, and of course all the entrepreneurial and innovative initiatives that happen throughout the curriculum and at the institution. On this particular project, that gives me a unique role in that I am both a researcher and consumer of what we're doing here. And I think that's one of the underlying value adds that I provide to this particular project, and that not only as a professional economist, adding that perspective on it, on the research perspective, and that's what most of my talk is going to be about. So I know you were looking forward to the talk by the economist, and looking at this whole thing from a 50,000 foot, from a higher perspective, from the top down. But I'm also a consumer of what's going on here. In that, as an academic leader, I want to know and I want to be able to articulate what the return on investment is for our academic library so that we make smart decisions in the university about where we make our investments. So I play a unique role on this particular project, but I think an important role given my title. I'm also going to start by giving you, a horror story, right? You're supposed to start every talk with a little joke. I'm going to start with a horrible story, so I'm going to do the exact opposite approach. And hopefully you won't throw me out of the room afterwards, but recognize that none of these comments are by me. 2 weeks ago, true story though, 2 weeks ago I went to a Business Incubator Association meeting. And these are all individuals that lead incubators at various campuses, okay? Incubators helping faculty get companies started, helping students get companies started. You know what these institutions are, right? And the individual in charge of the meeting stood up and said, to start the meeting, he said, the most useless organization at the university is the university library. I told you it was going to be a horrible story. And he went on to explain about how for his incubator, he wanted to get access to the Bloomberg feed to help out the individuals in his incubator. He went to the university librarian, and she basically refused to become an ally of his in this effort to get this information. He got incredibly frustrated. By the way, this is not Syracuse University. So of course he went directly to the mayor, whose last name happens to be, and got free access to the Bloomberg feed, right? And then immediately went over to Thomson Reuters and said, we've got free access to Bloomberg. Yeah. And immediately got free access to Thomson Reuters for his incubator. And unfortunately, from that point forward, starts out meetings with the most useless organization at an institution, is the library, which is not how we want people to start meetings, right? I see overall the goal of this project as looking at the return on investment of the academic library so that institutions can make smart decisions about those investments in the academic library and see the value it provides. But it always comes down to those little stories of individuals that feel as though that they are in alliance and partnership with the university librarian. That didn't go over too well. I should have started with a joke, shouldn't I? But I did. It just happened to me 2 weeks ago, and I felt as though it was important to share it. So as the economist on this project, I take a top-down approach and looking at it as the institution and what we do as an organization. I also, as an economist, look at this dichotomy between private goods and public goods, okay? Where private goods to an economist are really an exchange of you give me value and I give you money for that value, okay? And within the academic institution, we can actually talk about some of these goods as being private goods, and we model them as such. Courses are exchanged for tuition. Faculty hopefully give value to students, and they pay tuition for access to that value, and it's really an exchange of a private good. And we can talk about the return on their investment of their tuition in the institution and what it does for them over their lifetime in terms of higher salaries. That's been well estimated and well calculated by economists. What does it do to get a bachelor's degree? What does it do to get a master's degree? Why is there a negative return on investment to a PhD, in case you never heard that before, right? You actually make less money getting a PhD than if you'd left with a master's frequently. But it's still a private exchange of really money for value, and the exchange of that money for value gives us a signal of the worth to the individual who's giving the money. I'm willing to give this tuition because I want a degree from an institution of higher education. Research can actually, and research funding can actually be modeled as a private good. Government entity or a foundation is willing to give funding in return for the value of that research. Right? You do research for me, I'm going to give you funding. That's a reflection of its value to me. You're going to give the research back to me. And it's still somewhat of a private exchange. And as you see at the last bullet, the value to an individual or organization determines whether payment is made for the service. And economists are really good about figuring out the benefit or the consumer surplus or the value from services in which a financial exchange is made, right? If you're going to pay me for something, I can say you perceive at least that there's going to be that much value to you. The academic library, however, in the institution provides a public good. Okay? It provides a good for which there is frequently no financial exchange for that good. And it provides a good from which many individuals benefit from the same good. Okay? Whether we purchase print or online resources, subscriptions to materials, or have commons areas, we're not asking for a financial exchange from the individuals that use those services. And what we are providing is a collection of services from which many individuals benefit. Okay? From which many individuals benefit. Well, as with any public good, it becomes incredibly important to try and calculate the benefits to those individuals, to everybody that's sharing that resource, right? Because I don't have a payment signal from them. I don't have them saying, here's $1 million for your research, or here's $20,000 for tuition. I don't have a payment signal from them. It's important that I elicit from them the value of those services, and then add up the value from all those individuals that use those services to try and capture the benefit of those services. And quite frankly, then, to make an estimate of the value of the exchange. Okay? Let me point out, too, that as was said, I'm giving a sort of 50,000-foot view, a top-down view of the project, and what you're going to hear is great examples out of Don and Paula later about some of the things that have been going on. I also want to say this is a great period of the project, too, because it's really the first 6 months of what we're doing, right? You write a proposal and you think you know exactly what you're doing. You get the funding, and then you start scratching your head and you're saying, do we really know exactly what we were doing? And then you go through that great process in the first 6 months of figuring out how you're going to implement what you were doing. So it's a great period in the proposal itself, and we look forward to your input. the types of analysis in economics are obviously cost effectiveness, cost efficiency, and cost benefit, which lead us to a calculation of value or return on investment, okay? And we've done a lot of cost effectiveness and cost efficiency, right? Cost effectiveness is, I have two alternatives here, and which is going to, at the lowest cost, provide me this service, right? I can go with A or B, which does it at the lowest cost, and by calculating this out, hopefully I'll pick the one at the lowest cost so long as it gives me the same end result. Cost efficiency are calculations of how much does it cost per use, or how much does it cost per readership, or how much does it cost per copy, etc. So it's really just a calculation of the cost per output typically. And I use that in an assessment of what am I doing, right? And maybe I compare it, maybe I compare those measures at Syracuse University to those similar measures at the University of Illinois or New York University to figure out how my institution might be, whether or not my institution might be cost efficient compared to others. But then the next step is cost benefit analysis. And it really takes it to the next step and takes the next leap of saying, can I actually calculate out what benefit is? Can I actually calculate out what the value is of these services to those individual users? Okay? With public goods, whether it's the environment or libraries or other public goods, economists are faced with this constant struggle of can you calculate out the benefit to provide that, and then from that you can get these return on investment measures. Okay? It's estimating the value, estimating the cost, and really just looking at it as a ratio of the value to cost. Right? Now, for those of you that are familiar with the literature, this has been done a lot in the corporate library arena, in the special library arena, and in the public library arena. Okay? In fact, the gentleman sitting next to me has done all of the seminal work in the special library arena and some of the work in the public library arena too. There's no shortage of studies, and I will hold up Don's book. I said I wouldn't hold up my own book. But if you're if you're interested in many of the studies, or at least the seminal work in the special libraries arena, just pick up Don and Jose's book on how it's been done in the special libraries arena, right? And there's a host of literature in public libraries arena of looking at the return on investment of the public library. Oddly enough, and I think this is one of the interesting facts, is that if you were to take an average of all of these, or if you look at them all, right, they all come out to be about a 4-to-1 ROI. $4 in benefit to $1 in cost. Okay? Yeah, some come in at $6 to 1. We just heard about the 15 to 1 in grants for at least an academic library. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, the one at the University of Illinois was around a $4 to 1 in terms of the return on grants. And if you look at many of these studies in public libraries and special libraries, it's remarkable how many of them work around, end up with a roughly 4-to-1 result, which is something you should sort of carry in your back pocket, right? For most libraries, it's about a 4-to-1 return on investment, right? That is true in public libraries. That is true in special libraries. And I would say we have some, but little evidence in academic libraries, right? Academic libraries have been pretty much ignored in this whole ROI calculation. And that's what this study is attempting. And I say there are some studies, but there have been few compared to the volumes of studies that have been going on in other arenas. So what is value? And one of the things I wanted to identify in this project is, let's think about a triple accounting approach to value. Well, first of all, there is simply the economic benefit to those individuals that use the academic library, okay? And I put up a private benefit there only in the sense that it's that student using that service, right, that receives a value. It's a private benefit to that. It's that faculty member using that database that receives a value from using that database, right, that we want to measure. Now, collectively, we will add all that up to show the public value from all of those individual private values of the academic library. So there's this economic benefit of individuals using the library resources. There's also a social benefit. And what do I mean by that? Well, there is a value to the institution of having a library. It serves as a tool in recruitment. It serves as a tool in retention. It serves in identifying it as a significant institution that takes itself seriously, right? It serves as a marker in terms of the quality of the institution, whether it's Syracuse, Harvard, or a community college, right? And that's what I refer to as the social value. There is value to the institution of having an academic library. And it is important to factor that in to our calculation. And then the last piece I want to bring up that I want to convince many people in the academic library world of is there is also an environmental value of the academic library that hasn't been talked about very much, if at all, and yet is something that I think we missed, right? As everybody talked about, what is the environmental value, as we talk about LEED certification for buildings, as we talk about cap and trade and carbon emissions for countries, the academic library has actually produced an enormous environmental value. And as you see, have libraries gone green without even knowing it? Okay? Providing electronic access to resources instead of print access is an environmentally friendly thing to do. Okay? Providing access to individuals who do not have to travel to the library is an environmentally friendly thing to do. Okay? I used to say, for those of you that saw me talk 10 years ago, I used to commonly say the best thing the dean of my library has done for me is to keep me out of the library. And it was a reference to, in the early 90s where things became easy to access on my desktop. I loved the fact that I didn't have to go to the library every other day to see which journals came in, that I could do it online. There was enormous value from me doing that, although I was no longer a turnstile count. And what I contend is there is also an environmental value of providing that remote access, that networked access. Now, this has to be measured and teased out in terms of how people are actually behaving in order to calculate the environmental value of an academic library. Let me say this too, there is no question in my mind, even before doing the calculation, that the heart of the matter lies with the first bullet, the actual value to users of using that resource. But it's the second and third bullet that we shouldn't forget either. So, what are the methods used to estimate value? When goods and services are not purchased, I put that in a proviso because the economist's easy tool when you buy something is to say, hey, you paid for it, that shows you the value, right? And we'll use that to figure out what your value is. Well, with these goods and services, we are not purchasing things, right? However, there are different metrics that can be used, different methods that can be used to try and elicit value. Well, there's the simple size measure, right? Collection size, assessed value of special collections, that gives us, albeit the old value, but still very valid, this is the worth of this organization at this institution. Then there are metrics of use, turnstiles, downloads, and readership, right? For each of which we say, well, the time spent using these resources is a signal of the value, right? If people are willing to spend time traveling to get to the resource, willing to spend time in reading that resource, and their time has value, there is an opportunity cost to their time. Their time has value. We can use that to measure their value. Don and I actually had lunch earlier and talked about how do we spent quite a bit of time talking about how do you measure the value of time to an undergraduate student, which in and of itself is not an easy thing to do. but it's a reflection of if our students are using our resource and spending their time, we want to make certain that we capture, that is a signal of the value to them, right? And we want to make certain that we measure and capture that, okay? Or what is the extra time it takes to get a resource from another source, right? If you were to, and if you look at many of the ROI studies, right, it's also a matter of if you were to eliminate this access, what is the time and effort it would take you to get it from somewhere else, which is also an expression of the value from use of those resources, right? Contingent valuation has been used extensively in the environmental economics literature, right, which you can see, and they've been doing it for 20, 30 years now, which you can see it's a matter of what is the value to Yellowstone of you, right? What is the value of a clean water to you? And so it really comes down to a survey of the willingness to pay, right? Another method to figure out the value of the academic library. There are good ways and bad ways to do the surveys, but thankfully this has been done long enough so that we have some evidence of the right way to ask these questions, right? So we do elicit a response of what is this worth to you? How can this provide value to you? Okay? And then finally, and I think I'm going to finish off early, there is the financial value returned to us, and it was actually a brilliant methodology that was developed with that study originally at the University of Illinois that was spoken about earlier to look at the amount of grants awarded, right, to an institution and trace that back to the academic library to say if it weren't for the academic library, this X dollars in financial would not have come out at the other end in order to assess the return on investment, right? If we didn't have the academic library, we wouldn't have had these grants on the other end, and we can trace that back. And it was well done study, brilliant study of looking at the financial ROI of an academic research library. Now, albeit,
You're getting the hook.
I guess I am. No. It's what was I going to say? So, albeit the challenge is, and let me say this, that my role in the project is not only to infuse the economics throughout the project, to work with Syracuse University Academic Library to implement the project, but also we're bringing on board 3 to 5 primarily teaching institutions in New York State that will also be participating in the project. Because you can see with the financial value, I know some of you in the room are already thinking, hey, we don't do that much in grants. This is not going to look too good for my academic library. However, no, this is just one measure, one way of doing it. And as we bring on board a small set of teaching libraries in New York State, part of these methods on use, et cetera, will be deployed in order to estimate that value to those users, recognizing that there are institutions that grants are not a major piece of. And of course, for my 2 next presenters, this battery's almost dead, so you'll be without. Not only does it have to restart, but there's no battery left. So, and then finally, there is regression analysis, which is just, an economist way of doing statistics that allow us to see the correlations between the investment in the academic library and other metrics at the institution, albeit grants, albeit retention, albeit other statistics. Can we show a correlation between what we put into our library and those outcomes that we care about at our institutions? Thank you. It's getting the warning sign. Okay. And unknowns to you, or maybe knowns to you, that is my last slide. So I think all of us are looking forward to your input on what we're doing too, because as I said, this is the first 6 months of the project, And as we've had great discussions about how we move forward, and there was a previous meeting that solicited input from many of the ARL library directors too, I think we're still in that great period of soliciting feedback about, this is what really matters to my academic institution at my library. So, thank you.